I had spent months planning for this Christmas. The whole house smelled like cinnamon and pine, and I could already hear the faint hum of the Christmas carols playing in the background. I've always loved this time of year. There's something about it that makes everything feel right, like the world slows down, just a little, allowing you to enjoy the simple things. At 68, I'd spent a lifetime decorating for the holidays, making sure everything was just perfect. I knew where every ornament belonged on the tree and how to arrange the stockings, so they hung evenly. This year, I wanted everything to be flawless. Peter, my husband, and I had spent so many years building this life together. Our home in a quiet, comfortable neighborhood in San Francisco, raising our children, and then slowly transitioning into our golden years. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that was enough. The tree stood proudly in the living room, its twinkling lights casting a soft glow over the room. Our two grown children, Sarah and Matthew, were supposed to be coming over later in the evening. The house was ready, the food was all prepped, and Peter had even agreed to leave work a little early to help me set things up. He was always so busy with his projects, but I could tell he was making an effort this year to make it special. I stood by the window, looking out at the snow gently falling, watching the world transform into a winter wonderland. I felt a sense of peace, a quiet confidence that everything was as it should be. This was the Christmas I had imagined. After all, the last few years had been hard. Losing my mother, watching our children grow up and leave the house, and then just adjusting to the quieter, slower pace of life. But this Christmas was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be our chance to come together, celebrate what we had, and enjoy the fruits of the life we'd built. Peter had been quieter than usual lately. I noticed it, but I didn't want to think too much about it. Maybe it was the stress of work or the idea that we were getting older. But I didn't think much more of it. That evening, he seemed excited, ready to share the holiday with us. I smiled to myself, happy that after all these years, we still managed to find time for one another, even in the rush of the holiday season. When the doorbell rang and I heard Sarah and Matthew's laughter outside, I felt my heart swell. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Family together. A perfect Christmas. But little did I know, this night would change everything. Matthew, Peter's younger brother, had been struggling with gambling for as long as I could remember. It wasn't something anyone talked about much, but I knew. I could see it in Peter's eyes every time his brother's name came up, guilt, frustration, and maybe a little bit of hope. Hope that one day Matt would turn things around. That one day he'd stop making bad decisions and get his life together. But every time we thought he had made progress, something would happen. Another slip-up, another promise broken, and each time it seemed like Peter was the one who picked up the pieces. I didn't know the full extent of Matt's troubles, but Peter always told me, "I'm just trying to help him. Laura, he's family. I have to be there for him." I never agreed with the way Peter handled Matt's problems, but I understood the need to help family. I just didn't know how deep it went, how far Peter was willing to go for Matt. And I never would have guessed that this Christmas I would learn just how far that willingness would take him. I'd spent weeks thinking about this holiday, about the memories we would make, and how lucky we were to still have each other. I didn't know that the man I'd spent so many years with, the man I trusted, was about to make a decision that would break me. I didn't know that Peter had secretly taken out a reverse mortgage on our home to pay off Matt's gambling debts. Everything I thought I knew about our life, about the trust we had, was about to be shattered. As Sarah and Matt arrived, the laughter and warmth filled the house. Peter was already in the kitchen, finishing up some last-minute preparations. He looked over his shoulder and gave me a quick smile, but there was something off. His eyes weren't quite the same. They were heavy, tired, as though something was weighing on him that he didn't want to share. I didn't push it, though. Tonight wasn't about what was going wrong. It was supposed to be about what was going right. But I should have known. There's always that feeling, isn't there? That nagging sense that something isn't quite right, even when everything seems perfect. That little voice that says, "Pay attention, something is coming." It wasn't until after dinner, when we gathered in the living room by the fire, that it happened, the moment that everything changed. Peter stood up from his chair and raised his glass, a slow smile on his face as he looked at me. "To family," he said, his voice steady, "and to new beginnings." I smiled back, thinking he was just being sentimental, but then his words hit me like a ton of bricks. "You're officially homeless now, Laura," Peter said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sold the house last week, sis. Merry Christmas." My heart stopped. I looked around the room. Everyone was staring at me, wide-eyed, waiting for my reaction. I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was spinning. My hands went cold, and I dropped the glass I was holding. It shattered on the floor, the sound of it echoing in my ears. "Sold it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean, sold it?" Peter's face was pale now. "I had to do it, Laura. I didn't have a choice. Matt, he needed help. I couldn't let him fall any deeper. I didn't understand. How could he have done this? How could he have made such a huge decision without telling me? I didn't know what to say. The words wouldn't come. It was like my mind couldn't catch up with what I was hearing. Peter's brother, Matt, just stood there, looking at me like nothing had happened. No apology, no remorse, just a casual look like he didn't even understand why this was such a big deal. I felt like I was drowning. The betrayal was suffocating. That Christmas, the one I'd spent months planning, was no longer about family togetherness and joy. It was about betrayal. And my life, the one I had worked so hard to build, was slipping right through my fingers. The living room was buzzing with energy as I walked in, trying my best to hold it together. The scent of roast turkey and gingerbread cookies still hung in the air, and Christmas lights twinkled in the corner of the room. Everyone was gathered around, enjoying the holiday cheer. Laughter filled the space, mingling with the soft hum of Christmas carols in the background. It should have been perfect, right? But something felt off. Peter and Matt were standing near the fireplace, engaged in an animated conversation. Matt's deep laugh echoed through the room, and Peter's eyes were a little too bright, almost too eager, as he spoke to his brother. I stood by the door for a moment, watching them, my stomach tightening with a feeling I couldn't quite place. They didn't look like they were just celebrating Christmas. They looked like they were in on a secret. The whole scene felt surreal. My mind was trying to push away the unsettling thoughts that had been building up all day. What was it about their interaction that felt so different? They were both laughing a little too loudly, Peter's voice tinged with an edge I hadn't heard in a while. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I tried to shake off the unease as I greeted Sarah, who gave me a hug. She looked beautiful as always, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, a slight glow on her face from the festive atmosphere. But as we exchanged pleasantries, I could tell that something was weighing on her too. She smiled, but there was an unmistakable concern in her eyes, just like the one I had. Maybe she knew something I didn't. The evening carried on with the usual holiday chatter, children running around, relatives swapping stories, the sound of clinking glasses. And yet, my unease didn't fade. In fact, it grew stronger with every passing moment. Peter was different tonight. He wasn't the man I knew. He wasn't the man I had trusted for all these years. And that was the hardest part. The man I had shared everything with, built a life with. He was standing right in front of me, but I couldn't recognize him anymore. As the night wore on, I felt the air shift. It was like something was about to happen, something I wasn't prepared for. Peter stood up, glass in hand, calling for everyone's attention. My heart skipped a beat, my body tensing. This was it. I could feel it deep in my bones. Whatever was coming next, it was going to change everything. The room went quiet, the chatter dying down as everyone turned to Peter, waiting for him to speak. His face was flushed, but there was a strange sense of pride in his posture. The look in his eyes made me want to look away, but I couldn't. I was frozen. To new beginnings, Peter said, raising his glass. His voice was louder than it needed to be, but there was an energy in it, a sense of finality. To fresh starts and to family. I swallowed hard, trying to process the words, but before I could react, he continued. I've taken out a reverse mortgage on the house to help Matt, Peter said, his voice cracking. It wasn't loud, but it might as well have been a shout. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My world came to a sudden stop. Everything around me blurred, and I felt like I was sinking. The weight of his words crushed me, each syllable landing like a blow. A reverse mortgage? To help Matt? I couldn't breathe. I stared at Peter, my mouth dry, my mind racing. Was this some sort of joke? Was he seriously saying this in front of everyone? The shock hit me like a freight train, and for a moment I couldn't think. I couldn't move. My hands trembled, but I kept them by my sides, trying to hold it together. Peter, I finally whispered, my voice barely a breath. I didn't know what else to say. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what had just come out of his mouth. He had taken out a reverse mortgage on our home, a home that was supposed to be ours, paid off, a place where we could retire in peace. A home I thought was safe. He had taken everything I had worked so hard for, everything we had worked for, and given it away. Matt was standing there, looking at me, with a mixture of guilt and indifference. It was almost as if he didn't understand the magnitude of what Peter had just done, or worse, didn't care. His smug expression, the way he fiddled with his champagne flute, only added to the sting of Peter's announcement. He looked at me like it was no big deal, like I was supposed to just accept it, like he wasn't the one whose actions had led to all of this. I felt my heart break into 1,000 pieces. Betrayal. That was the only word I could think of. Betrayed by the one person I thought would always have my back. My husband. How could you? I whispered, my voice cracking as the tears began to well up. How could you do this without telling me? Peter's face shifted for a second, a flicker of remorse crossing his features, but it was gone before I could catch it. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Instead, he looked around the room, as if searching for support from everyone else. This was a big decision, Laura, he finally said, his tone defensive. I had to help Matt. He's been struggling. I couldn't just watch him fall deeper into this mess. I'm trying to fix things. Laura, fix things? I felt the anger rise in my chest, hot and fierce. How was this fixing anything? By risking our home? By putting everything we had on the line for a man who had never taken responsibility for his actions? You didn't even consult me, I said, my voice shaking now. You didn't even think to ask me how I felt about it. This is our home, Peter, our lives. And you've gone behind my back and put it all in jeopardy for your brother. Peter opened his mouth again, but his words didn't reach me. They couldn't. The damage had been done. My heart was pounding, my thoughts a tangled mess. I could feel the weight of the room pressing down on me. The silence in the air was suffocating. I turned away, fighting back the tears that were threatening to spill over. This wasn't supposed to be how it was supposed to go. Christmas was supposed to be about joy and family, not betrayal. And now, all I could think about was how everything I had believed in had just crumbled right before my eyes. How long have you been planning this? I asked, my voice barely audible. I didn't need an answer. I already knew. It had been happening behind my back, in the shadows. Peter didn't answer, but I didn't need him to. I had already begun to realize that the man I had spent my life with, the man I had trusted, was not the man I thought he was anymore. The weight of the betrayal settled deep in my chest, and with it, a crushing realization. The life I had built, the life we had built, wasn't as secure as I thought. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I can't do this, I finally said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I need some space, Peter. I don't know what to do with all of this. I stepped outside, the cold air biting at my skin, but it didn't help clear my mind. I needed space, needed to breathe. The weight of what Peter had said, the reverse mortgage, the house being taken from us without a word, was too much. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my head was spinning. I walked slowly across the driveway, the snow crunching under my boots, but it all felt like a distant echo. It didn't matter. Nothing made sense anymore. I had trusted Peter. For years, I had trusted him with everything, my heart, my life, our home. He was the man I married, the man I built this life with. But now I was questioning everything. How could he do this to me? How could he put his brother above us, above our future, without even telling me? It felt like all these years together had meant nothing, that all the decisions we made as partners, as a team, had somehow been erased in one careless moment. I stood there for a while, staring at nothing, feeling everything. The holiday lights from the house flickered, but they couldn't warm me. They couldn't erase what had just happened. I had imagined this night in so many ways, but this wasn't even close to what I had expected. I had hoped for laughter, for family, for peace. But instead, I felt betrayed, cold, and completely alone. After what felt like hours, I heard the door behind me open. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Peter. He didn't say anything at first, but I could hear him moving toward me, his footsteps heavy in the snow. Laura. His voice was soft, almost pleading, but I couldn't look at him. Not yet. I didn't trust myself to speak. I had to do it. Peter continued, his words tumbling out in a rush. I did it for Matt. He was drowning, Laura. I couldn't just let him fail. His voice was full of conviction, but all I could hear was the excuse, the justification. And it didn't sit right with me. Not at all. Peter, I finally said, my voice shaking. We've worked so hard for this house, this life, and you sold it without telling me. You didn't even think to ask me how I felt about it. How could you do that? How could you make such a huge decision without even including me? Peter sighed, his footsteps coming closer until I could feel him standing right behind me. I couldn't face him, not yet. I didn't know if I could ever look him in the eye again. I didn't want to burden you, he said quietly. I thought it was the right thing to do. Matt needed help, and I couldn't let him keep spiraling. But his words didn't reach me. They didn't make it better. They just made everything worse. This wasn't about Matt needing help. This wasn't about him being in trouble. This was about Peter betraying me, the person he had promised to stand by through everything. He had made a decision that affected our future, our stability, and he hadn't even considered my feelings. I turned to face him. Finally, his eyes were filled with guilt, but there was something else there too, something I couldn't quite place. It was like he was trying to justify what he had done, but it wasn't working. I needed him to understand how much this hurt, but I didn't think he did. Not yet. Why didn't you talk to me first, Peter? Why didn't you come to me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I've always been here for you. We've always made decisions together. But you just went ahead and made this choice on your own. You didn't even consider what it would do to me. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked down at the ground, like he was ashamed to meet my eyes. I thought you would understand, he finally said, his voice barely audible. "I thought you would understand why I had to help him. You don't know what it's like to watch someone you love destroy their life, Laura. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that I understood more than he knew. I understood what it was like to feel helpless, to watch someone you care about make bad decisions. But I had never, in a million years, thought that Peter would go this far. To put our future, our home, at risk for Matt, to make a decision without even consulting me, that wasn't love. That wasn't the man I had spent my life with. This isn't about helping Matt," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. "This is about you choosing him over me. You put your brother before your wife. You put your brother before everything we've built together. How am I supposed to trust you now?" Peter opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't let him. I couldn't. His words felt hollow, empty, like nothing he said would make this right. "I don't know what to do with this, Peter," I said, my eyes starting to well up with tears. "I don't know how to fix this. You've shattered everything. Everything I thought we had together. You've broken my trust, and I don't know if I can ever get that back." Peter stepped closer, reaching out for me, but I pulled away. I didn't want his touch right now. I needed distance, space to think, to figure out what came next. My heart was breaking, and I didn't know how to put it back together. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said softly. "I didn't, but I had to do something. I couldn't let Matt fall apart." "I understand that, Peter," I replied, my voice cracking. "But I'm not just here to clean up your mess. You made a decision that affects both of us. And now I have to pick up the pieces." I walked away from him, back into the house. The warmth from the fireplace greeted me, but it didn't bring comfort. It felt suffocating, like everything in the house was closing in around me. I had no idea how to move forward. The man I had trusted with my life, my future, had made a decision that changed everything. And I didn't know if I could ever forgive him for it. I sat down on the couch, my mind racing. What had just happened? How did we get here? And more importantly, where do we go from here? The morning after the Christmas party, everything felt different. The glow of the holiday lights seemed dimmer, and the warmth from the fireplace felt like a hollow comfort. I could hear the faint sounds of the family still talking in the kitchen, but I couldn't bring myself to join them. My mind was too clouded. Everything Peter had said, the reverse mortgage, Matt's debts, kept echoing in my head. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I called Peter into the living room. He stood there, shifting from foot to foot, like he didn't quite know how to start. His usual confidence was gone. I could see it in his eyes. The guilt was clear, but there was also a hint of defensiveness, like he was bracing himself for what was to come. "Peter," I said, my voice firm, "I need you to explain everything. The mortgage, the debts. I don't care how uncomfortable it makes you. I just need to understand." He nodded slowly and sat down across from me, his hands wringing together as if the weight of what he was about to reveal was too much to carry. "Laura, I didn't want you to find out like this," he began, his voice shaking. "But I didn't know what else to do. Matt's debts have been spiraling out of control for years. Every time he said he'd pay back what he owed, he never did. I tried to help him, tried to fix it, but nothing was working." I felt a tightness in my chest. It was like the pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together. But the image wasn't what I expected. "How much does he owe?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Peter hesitated, looking down at the floor for a moment, like he was trying to find the right words. Then he took a deep breath and met my eyes. "Over $100,000, Laura. And that's not even counting the interest and penalties." I couldn't just sit by while he lost everything. He's my brother. I had to do something. My stomach dropped. $100,000? How had it gotten so bad? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The reality of it hit me all at once. Over the years, I'd watched Matt make poor choices, and I'd hoped he would pull himself together. But this was beyond anything I had imagined. Peter, I said, the words heavy on my tongue. $100,000? And you decided to take out a reverse mortgage on our home? Our home? We've spent years making this house ours, and now it's gone. For Matt. For his mistakes. Peter's face crumpled, the guilt in his eyes clear. I didn't know what else to do, Laura. It was the only way I could think of to help him. I thought if I could just get him out of this mess, he'd have a chance to start over. I know it's a huge risk, but he's my brother. What else could I do? I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing, trying to process everything. A reverse mortgage was something I had never imagined us considering, let alone something Peter had done without even discussing it with me. It was our house, our life, our future at stake. And now, everything felt uncertain. How could Peter not see how much damage this had done to our security? And you think this is helping? I asked, the words bitter on my lips. You think taking our house from us is going to help Matt? How does that make sense? Peter opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He just sat there, looking at me with pleading eyes, as if he was hoping I would somehow understand, that I would see the situation the way he did. But I couldn't. I couldn't see it that way. I could feel the anger building inside me, and I tried to keep it contained, tried to hold it together. But it was hard. How could I not be angry? Peter had risked everything we had worked for, everything we had built for someone who had never taken responsibility for his own actions. I felt like I was suffocating. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to clear my head. I can't believe you do this without even talking to me about it. Peter, this is our future we're talking about. You just handed it over like it meant nothing. For what? To help Matt keep making the same mistakes. Peter stood up too, his face full of frustration. I didn't want to do this, Laura. I didn't want to hurt you. But Matt's family, too. I thought if I could just get him out of this, maybe he could fix his life. I didn't know how else to help him. I stopped pacing and turned to him, my heart breaking. And what about us, Peter? What about me? We've been married for over 40 years. We've worked hard to get where we are. And now you've put all of that at risk. What happens if we can't pay it back? What happens if we lose the house? Peter's face softened, and he stepped closer to me, his hands reaching out as if he wanted to comfort me. But I couldn't accept his comfort. Not right now. I didn't think about what it would do to us, he admitted, his voice quiet. I just wanted to help. I thought we could figure it out. I thought if I did this, Matt would finally get it together. But I see now that I was wrong. I see that I've made things worse. Worse, I repeated, my voice thick with emotion. This is more than just worse, Peter. You've torn apart everything we've built. Our home is gone. Our stability is gone. And for what? Peter looked at me, his eyes filled with guilt. I'm sorry, Laura. I never wanted to hurt you. But those words, those apologies, didn't make anything better. They didn't change what had happened. They didn't fix the fact that we were now financially vulnerable, our future uncertain. And I couldn't help but wonder, had Peter always been this willing to sacrifice everything for his brother? Had I never seen it before? I felt so lost in that moment, so confused. I wanted to understand why Peter had done this, why he thought it was the right thing to do. But all I could feel was the betrayal. It wasn't just about the money. It wasn't just about the house. It was about trust. It was about the fact that Peter had made this decision without me, without considering how much it would affect me. I sat down again, my head in my hands. I don't know what to do with all of this. I said, my voice breaking. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Peter. Peter didn't respond. He just stood there, looking at me with sad eyes, knowing that the damage had been done. I had no answers, no clarity, just a feeling of being utterly lost. I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. The anger, the hurt, the confusion, it was eating away at me, and I needed answers. I needed to know why Matt had let this happen, why he had allowed Peter to put everything we had on the line to save him from his own mess. I hadn't been able to get a straight answer from Peter, and I knew I wasn't going to get one from him now. So I made my way over to Matt, who was in the corner of the room, sipping on a beer and laughing with some of the younger family members. He looked so relaxed, so carefree. I could hardly believe he was the same person who had put us all in this situation. I walked over to him, my heart racing with each step. He didn't even look up when I approached, so I stood there for a moment, watching him, trying to find the right words. My hands were trembling at my sides, but I clenched them into fists to steady myself. I wasn't going to let him brush me off like he always did. Matt, I said, my voice calm but firm. We need to talk. He finally looked up, his smile fading when he saw the seriousness in my face. He opened his mouth to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. I want to know why you didn't take responsibility for your actions. Why you let Peter take out a reverse mortgage on our house to pay off your debts. Why you let him risk everything for you, I demanded, my voice rising as I spoke. This isn't just a little mistake, Matt. This is our home, our future, and you let it happen. Matt's face twisted with frustration, and he took another sip of his beer, like he was trying to avoid eye contact. I didn't ask him to do that, Laura, he said quickly, waving his hand dismissively. I didn't ask anyone to help me. Then why didn't you get your life together? I shot back, my anger bubbling to the surface. Why didn't you take responsibility for your own mess instead of letting everyone around you clean it up? Peter shouldn't have had to make that decision for you. He shouldn't have risked everything for you. Matt sighed heavily, clearly irritated now. You don't understand, okay? I don't know how to get out of this. I'm stuck. I've tried, but it never works. It's not like I wanted any of this to happen. My frustration grew with each word that came out of his mouth. So what? You're just going to keep blaming everyone else for your mistakes? You're going to let Peter fix it all for you while he drags us all down with you? I could feel the tears threatening to spill, but I forced them back. I wasn't going to let him see how deeply this hurt. Matt shrugged. I don't know what you want from me, Laura. I've got a problem. I know that. I'm trying to deal with it, but it's not as easy as you think. I don't know how to make it stop. My heart ached as I looked at him. He was always so good at brushing things off, pretending everything was fine, like the mess he'd made wasn't his problem. But it was. It was his problem, and now it was my problem too, and Peter's, and the whole family's. Yet, here he was, still making excuses, still avoiding the reality of what he had done. Do you even understand the mess you've caused, Matt? I asked, my voice low, almost a whisper. Do you understand how much this is affecting everyone? You've let Peter ruin our future, all to save you from the consequences of your own actions. How do you think that makes me feel? For a moment, Matt didn't say anything. He just stood there, looking at me with a blank expression. Then, finally, he sighed and looked down at the ground, like he couldn't face me anymore. I don't know what to say, Laura. I don't know how to fix this, he mumbled, his voice quieter now. That's the problem, Matt, I said, my frustration turning into a quiet sadness. You don't even try to fix it. You just let other people do it for you. And now, look where we are. Look at what we've lost. The silence between us grew heavy. I wanted him to understand, to see what he had done, but it was clear he didn't get it. He was too caught up in his own problems to realize the destruction he had left in his wake. And maybe that was what hurt the most, knowing that he would never take responsibility for his actions. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. This wasn't getting us anywhere. I wasn't going to get an apology or any kind of meaningful explanation from Matt. He didn't know how to deal with his own issues, let alone the mess he dragged everyone else into. Maybe it's time you figure out your own life, Matt, I said softly, shaking my head. Maybe it's time you start taking responsibility for once. Because, frankly, I'm done cleaning up after you. Matt didn't respond. He didn't apologize. He didn't even seem to care. He just stood there, looking down at the floor, and I could see the regret in his eyes. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to make me feel like he had learned anything. I turned away from him, my heart heavy with the weight of what I had just realized. I wasn't going to get any answers from Matt. I wasn't going to get the apology or the explanation I was hoping for. The truth was, he was never going to change, and neither was Peter. As I walked away from Matt, my mind kept spinning. I felt lost. I felt like the family I had known and loved was falling apart before my eyes. Peter and Matt, both of them had made choices that hurt me, that tore our lives apart. And now, I wasn't sure where to turn. I wasn't sure if I could ever trust either of them again. I went outside for some fresh air, the cold wind biting at my skin. I had no answers, no closure, just a family broken by lies and mistakes that no one was willing to own up to. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. Things would never be the same. Not after this. Christmas came and went, but it felt like it had passed me by. The holiday I had spent so many months planning for, the one I had pictured in my mind, turned out to be nothing like I'd imagined. The tree was still up, its twinkling lights casting a soft glow in the room, but there was no warmth in it. The laughter I had been hoping for, the joy of family coming together, it was all gone. It felt hollow, empty. After the confrontation with Matt, I had retreated into myself. I barely interacted with anyone for the rest of the evening. The house felt more like a museum than a home. I walked through the halls, noticing the familiar sights, the framed photos of our kids, the little trinkets we had collected over the years, the soft carpet I had picked out so carefully. But none of it felt like it belonged to me anymore. Peter tried to talk to me, but every time I looked at him, all I saw was the man who had betrayed me, who had shattered my trust. He had broken something in me that I wasn't sure could ever be fixed. The man I had built a life with, the man I had loved for so long, had made a decision that I couldn't even begin to understand. And now I was left with a family torn apart and a future that seemed so uncertain. I sat alone in the living room that night, long after everyone had gone to bed. The sound of my own thoughts was the loudest thing in the house. I thought about all the Christmases we had shared, the ones that were full of laughter, love, and warmth. I thought about the dreams we had growing old together in this house, watching our children build families of their own. Now, those dreams seemed so far away, like a distant memory I couldn't quite reach. I spent the evening going through photos in the photo album, staring at the faces of a younger, happier couple. There was Peter smiling with his arm around me. There were the kids laughing in front of the tree. I could still remember the joy we felt in those moments. But now, everything felt tainted. Every happy memory was shadowed by the reality of what Peter had done. As I sat there, the weight of it all pressed down on me. I didn't know what to do with these feelings of betrayal. I didn't know if I could ever get past this. I thought about my life with Peter, our ups, our downs, the years we spent building a life together. But now, I wondered if it had all been built on compromises I never agreed to. Had Peter always put others before me? Had I been living in a partnership where my voice didn't matter? The thought terrified me. That night, as the house grew quiet, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. I thought about Matt, about the money, about the mortgage, about the house. And most of all, I thought about Peter. I thought about how much I had trusted him, how much I had believed in us. But now, it felt like that trust had been broken beyond repair. The next morning, Peter came into the kitchen, his eyes red from lack of sleep. He looked at me, his face filled with regret, but I couldn't bring myself to look back at him the way I used to. His presence felt suffocating now, like a shadow that loomed over everything. "I'm sorry, Laura," he said softly. "I know I hurt you. I never wanted to do that." I felt my heart twist in my chest. The words didn't have the power to heal me. They couldn't fix what had been broken. He had made a decision that had impacted not just our finances, but our entire life. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "You risked everything for Matt, and I was left in the dark. You didn't even think to talk to me before doing something so huge. I don't even know if I can trust you anymore." Peter's face faltered, and I saw the guilt written all over him. "I didn't think it through, Laura. I know that. I didn't want to hurt you. But I was trying to save him. I was trying to save my brother." I shook my head, my chest tight with the weight of his words. "You didn't just hurt me, Peter. You hurt us. You hurt everything we've built." He reached for my hand, but I pulled it away before he could touch me. "I need space, Peter. I need time to think about this, about everything." Peter's eyes filled with desperation. "Laura, please, don't walk away from me. I'm sorry. I'll do anything to make this right. Please." But his words didn't feel like enough. They didn't erase the fact that our home was gone, that our security was gone. They didn't change the fact that I was questioning everything we had worked for. I didn't know if I could ever feel safe with him again. "I don't know what to do, Peter," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I don't know if I can stay in a marriage where I'm not even consulted, where my voice doesn't matter." He stood there, his eyes pleading, but I could see the helplessness in his expression. He knew, just as I did, that things had changed. Things could never go back to how they were. "I need to think," I said, my voice steady now, though my heart was breaking. "I need to figure out what this all means. I can't do this right now." Peter nodded slowly, and without another word, he walked out of the room. I felt the space between us grow wider with every passing second. The distance was no longer just physical, it was emotional, and it felt like a canyon I wasn't sure we could ever bridge. I sat down on the couch again, my hands in my lap. The house felt so quiet, so empty. I didn't know what the future held for me, for us. I didn't know if I could ever trust Peter again, or if I even wanted to try. I didn't know if this marriage could survive, and if it could, what would it even look like? For the first time, I realized that I didn't have the answers. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't move forward until I understood the full weight of what had happened. And right now, that meant stepping away and giving myself the time and space to figure it out. Weeks had passed since the Christmas debacle. The anger that had gripped me in the immediate aftermath was slowly fading, replaced by a quiet sense of clarity I hadn't expected. I wasn't ready to forgive Peter, not yet, and I wasn't sure I ever would be, but I was beginning to see things differently. The storm inside me had settled a bit, and I could finally think without feeling like I was drowning. I spent a lot of time on my own, reflecting. I tried to put my thoughts in order to understand what had happened and where I was headed, but it wasn't easy. Every time I thought I had it figured out, another wave of doubt or pain would hit me. But through it all, one thing became clear. I wasn't the same person anymore. The woman I was before all of this happened, the woman who believed in family, in loyalty, in the promises made over the years, she was gone. And I didn't know if I could get her back. I started reaching out to friends, old friends, people I hadn't seen in years. I needed their perspective, needed to remind myself of the person I used to be before everything got so tangled up in lies and betrayal. There was Anna, a longtime friend from when the kids were young. We hadn't spoken much since our lives had taken different paths, but she was still there, still offering her support. We spent afternoons at coffee shops, reminiscing about the old days. It was strange at first, talking about things that felt like a lifetime ago, but with every conversation, I began to feel like myself again. I wasn't just Peter's wife anymore. I wasn't just someone who had spent decades supporting a family, building a life. I was me, Laura, and somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that. My friends reminded me of who I used to be, of the woman who had dreams of her own, of the woman who had built something for herself, even if it was just small moments of joy here and there. They reminded me of the parts of me that had been buried under the weight of taking care of everyone else. And it felt good to remember that person. As I spent more time reflecting, the realization hit me harder and harder. My worth wasn't defined by my relationship with Peter. It wasn't defined by the house we built or the life we'd created together. It wasn't even defined by the betrayal I'd experienced. I was not a victim. I was not just Peter's wife. I was Laura, and I had the power to decide who I wanted to be moving forward. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but slowly I began to consider a future without him. A future without Peter. The thought used to terrify me. We had been together for so long. Our entire lives had been intertwined. But now, the idea of walking away didn't seem so impossible. I couldn't live the rest of my life feeling like I had to pick up the pieces of his mistakes. I couldn't let his choices determine the course of my life anymore. I started to picture my life without Peter, not in a cold, distant way, but in a way that made sense for me. It wasn't about revenge or anger. It wasn't about trying to punish him for what he had done. It was about me, my happiness, my future. So, after much thought, I knew what I had to do. I made the decision to separate from Peter. I filed for divorce. It was painful, and it wasn't something I had ever imagined doing. Divorce was never a word I thought would be a part of our story, but it had to be done. For me, I couldn't stay in a marriage where my voice had been ignored, where my feelings didn't matter enough to be considered in the big decisions. I couldn't stay with someone who had put his family, his brother, above me without even thinking to consult me first. I couldn't keep sacrificing my peace, my security, just to keep a marriage intact that had already been broken beyond repair. The day I filed for divorce was one of the hardest days of my life. I sat in the office, signing the papers, my hands shaking. It felt like I was tearing apart a part of my soul. But at the same time, there was a sense of relief. I had taken control. I was finally doing something for me, something that would help me reclaim my life. After the papers were filed, I went home. The house felt empty, but not in the way it did before. This time, it was quiet, and I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. There was a strange sense of freedom in that silence. I had stepped away from something that had held me hostage for too long. My fear of losing Peter, my fear of change. Now, I was left to pick up the pieces. But this time, I wasn't alone. I had my friends, my children, and most importantly, I had me, the woman I had forgotten existed. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was headed in the right direction. I started to think about what I wanted moving forward. What did I want my life to look like? What was important to me now? My life wasn't over just because my marriage was ending. It was just beginning. I learned a lot about myself in those days after the divorce was filed. I learned that family was important, yes, but so was my own happiness and well-being. I learned that I didn't have to live my life based on the choices of others. I had my own path to walk, and I didn't have to let anyone stand in my way. And as I stood there in the quiet of my house, I thought about the future. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew I could handle it. I could rebuild. I could find peace again. And maybe, just maybe, I could even find happiness. I took a deep breath as I stood in the doorway of my new apartment. The place was smaller than I was used to, but it was mine. No shared decisions, no compromises, just my space. It wasn't much: one bedroom, a small living room, and a kitchen I could barely move around in. But it felt like freedom. I hadn't realized how much I needed that freedom until I walked through the door. It wasn't the freedom to do whatever I wanted, but the freedom to be who I was again. To have a life that didn't revolve around Peter or Matt or anyone else. It was a chance to rebuild, to find myself again without the weight of other people's mistakes hanging over me. Of course, it wasn't easy. It wasn't supposed to be. Starting over, especially after so many years of being tied to one person in one life, felt like a daunting task. The silence in the apartment was a constant reminder that everything had changed. I was no longer Laura Davidson, wife and mother. I was just Laura, and that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I spent the first few days unpacking, though it didn't feel like I was unpacking a home. It felt like I was unpacking the last few years of my life and putting them in their place. Old photos, the few things that reminded me of who I used to be before all of this happened. Little pieces of myself that I had forgotten about along the way. It was hard, but it was also healing. I didn't need to hang onto the past. I needed to embrace the present. I was living my life for me, and that was enough. My children, Sarah and Matthew, were the first to visit. I knew they'd been worried about me. They'd seen the toll the last few months had taken on me. The strain in my voice, the way I had lost myself in trying to fix things with Peter, in trying to keep a family together that was already breaking apart. They were sad, of course. Sad that I had to make this decision. Sad that the family they had known was no longer what it once was. But they supported me. "I don't think you've ever looked more like yourself, Mom," Sarah said as she walked into my new apartment, looking around at the empty boxes and the bare walls. I could see the worry in her eyes, but there was something else there too. Relief, maybe. I had always been the strong one, the one who held things together. But now she was seeing me finally take control again. "Yeah," Matt added, his voice soft but sincere. "I'm proud of you, Mom." This was a big step. Their support meant the world to me. For so long, I had felt like I was walking alone in this. But now, I was reminded that I wasn't. My kids loved me. They didn't need me to be perfect. They just needed me to be me. We spent the afternoon talking, just the three of us, like we used to before everything fell apart. They were sad, yes, but they understood. They knew that sometimes to move forward, you have to let go of what's holding you back. That night, as I sat in my small living room, the sound of my children's laughter still echoing in my mind, I realized something. I had done the right thing. I had made the choice to reclaim my life, and though the road ahead wouldn't be easy, I was ready to walk it. The weight I had carried for so long was finally lifting. I wasn't defined by my marriage, by Peter, by his mistakes. I was defined by my strength, my ability to survive and rebuild. It was painful, of course. It hurt, but the pain wasn't as overwhelming as it used to be. The wounds were still there, but they were healing, slowly but surely. And as I looked around the apartment, I felt a sense of peace settle in my chest. This was my new beginning. and it was up to me to make it something beautiful. I wasn't sure where the journey would take me, but I knew I had the strength to face whatever came next. As I reflect on everything that has happened, I can't help but ask myself, have you ever felt betrayed by someone you loved? Can a relationship survive when trust has been broken so fundamentally? How do you find the strength to rebuild your life after a painful betrayal? These are the questions that I've had to answer for myself, and maybe you're asking yourself the same things. I've learned that sometimes letting go is the hardest thing to do, but it's also the thing that sets you free. It's not easy, but it's worth it. And now, I ask you, have you ever made a difficult decision for your own well-being, even if it meant letting go of something or someone important? What city are you listening from? And what time is it there? Write it in the comments. And if you'd like to help me keep sharing these emotional, thrilling stories every day, even a small donation makes a big difference. It truly helps keep the channel alive. For more life stories like this, you can explore the other videos on my channel and subscribe. On the screen, you'll see 2 new stories I'm sure you'll enjoy. Click one and start listening right away. With love.